Chapter 8. The Gift. Monday, the first day of the school week, and unfortunately for the case of many high school students, not the last. I know this from experience, guys. There was a time in my life when I was in the shoes of Evangeline Anthony Elliott of Los Angeles. The day I graduated back in 2012, the same year Klaus Krieger had earned his credentials as a certified psychopathic killer, I felt reborn. Redesigned, just as Eva shall be throughout the course of this fucked up little thriller of mine. Just as my high school years were a prelude to me getting the story on paper, the last several pages were only a doorway to this moment. Eva Elliott walked into Los Angeles Central High the morning this moment occurred, not knowing this. Oh, excuse me. I'm going off on a tangent. Let's get back to the story, shall we? Eva despised Mondays, like many other boys and girls her age. At least this was her last year before going into the great beyond, where there was no higher power forcing her to get in a desk 5 days a week. She was in her frowning t-shirt and skirt, looking out the window from her seat in her English class. It was still raining. The room was silent, and the teacher, Mr. Yorkin, was sitting back, enjoying the latest issue of Hustler. This is what you get when teachers hit middle age and pop Viagra, Eva thought. They don't know when to keep it in. Looking at the clock, she noticed it was a minute from dismissal. Yorkin's breathing had become labored, and when the bell finally rang, he slipped into unconsciousness. It was his last hurrah, and the coroner wouldn't come for another 5 hours. The way he was sitting, with his barely dripping penis sticking out of his fly, his mouth and eyes wide open, Eva could tell that he was out of it. It was the last time she saw him. She stepped out of the class and into the crowd of kids, and noticed that the lenses of her glasses were dirty. Eva could still see out of them, but she could also see the world around her as what it was. Dirty, out of balance. It was moments like these where she was truly out of place, out of body, out of mind. Nonetheless, she began to walk towards her locker. What does it feel like to be alone? I hate crowds so much, Eva thought. I always have. They're unavoidable, though. Her chicken legs shifted with haste in an effort to avoid being late for the next bell. Finally reaching her locker with her English textbook in hand, Eva dialed the combination on her locker. When she opened it, she found to her bewilderment an apple. The fuck? Eva Elliott was no stranger to the bizarreness of existence. The last few years in particular formed a menagerie of it. However, discovering an apple in her locker was a true oddity. She didn't particularly care for apples. She was more of a blueberry and grape girl. Also inside the locker was a folded piece of torn notebook paper. Eva grabbed it and opened it up. Ever considered trying something new? KK. The initials in the message above it were neatly written, and certainly done with a Sharpie. There was no doubt in her mind. This was a gift from Klaus the Killer. Eva looked around as a surge of anxiety flickered throughout her. Why would he give me an apple? In fact, how would he know the combination? How could anyone? Looking down at the apple in her hand, she then realized that it was no ordinary fruit. She gulped and scratched her shoulder with her cheek as she bit her lip. So this is the vector for the retrovirus. Evangeline Elliott, you're the intersection between the present and the future, and the wheel is right in front of you. Jesus, what if it isn't a retrovirus? What if he poisoned it? I might die in the second I swallow a chunk. The guy's a psycho, for crying out loud. There's no telling what he's capable of. But then again, my drunk-ass dad is playing a role in all of this. He really wants to help me. He said it himself, if I get sick from this. The crowd was beginning to dwindle in size. Time was running out. It was now or never. Without a word, Eva took a bite of the apple. Brian Hicks had his eyes trained on the door of the class. All the seats were occupied, save for one, Eva's. The students had yet to get settled down, and the air was thick with conversation. Brian was silent. Suddenly he saw a figure through the glass of the door, moving without grace. He heard the knob turning. Then it came to a stop. Then the knob turned once more, and the door was violently yanked open, hitting the column next to it. The figure revealed itself. It was Eva. The students and the teacher of the class were speechless. The room had become a void. Eva? Brian asked. Eva was a statue, her feet glued to the ground. She was paler than she had ever been. Her skin, coupled with the emaciation, gave her an almost nightmarish look. She began, very slowly, to walk into the classroom. Mr. Bosley, the teacher of the class, asked Eva if she was all right. She was dead silent as she took a seat right next to Brian. Brian noticed that Eva had gulped. Her skull shifted towards him, eyes fixed on his. "Are you sure nothing's wrong?" he asked. Eva's lips moved very little, and he could hear the heavy breathing. Come closer." Brian bobbed his head forward. "Mom's here," Eva said. Brian felt Eva's hand grasp the back of his head, and she turned it towards the whiteboard at the front of the class. Eva extended her bony arm out and pointed. "No one's here, Eva. Your mother's not there." Eva turned Brian's head back to her, and she said, "She isn't supposed to be." She then made a gurgling noise, and all of a sudden blood rushed out of her mouth like Niagara Falls. Students exclaimed in shock, and some screamed. Brian's face and shirt got the worst of it. "Holy fuck, this is bad. This is bad. This is bad." Brian was speechless as the floor at his feet was stained with blood. Eva doubled over and hit the floor. Brian shouted, "Bosley, call 911. Damn it!" "What are you gonna do, kiddo? Be a hero?" "Don't be a pussy." "Reese, don't." "Shut up, bitch." It was Brian, the little boy who helped his mother off the rug of his living room, and it was Brian, the school journalist who survived his father's testosterone-induced rampages and a fierce custody battle that picked Eva off the tiled floor of the class. It's funny how life tosses reminders of the past right into your face. This wasn't the first time he had a woman's blood on him. "Can you walk, Eva?" She didn't respond. Instead, her bloody lips were forming a small and indecipherable movements. Her eyes rolled back into her head, but there was still life in the skeleton. Brian struggled to move fast with Eva in his arms as he made it out in the hallway. He was muttering under his labored breath, "Don't die on me." At the end of the hall, another teacher turned to the corner and shrieked at Brian and Eva. "This girl's fucking dying. I need help carrying her." Brian lumbered toward the lady, who, without question, slung Eva's left arm over her shoulder. The three made their way to the main office. The lady at the desk paid little attention, instead perusing a newspaper. Brian let the teacher hold Eva, and he began unbuttoning his shirt. "You've got to get people's attention somehow," he thought. Without a word, he removed his shirt and tossed it across the desk, blanketing the lady's face. "What the hell?" she exclaimed, and then she saw the blood. Then she saw Brian shirtless. Then she saw the teacher holding the shell of a girl in her arms. "Call 911, the teacher cried. The door behind them opened. "No need," a voice said. Both turned around to see a paramedic, relatively young and tall for his job, holding the door open with one rubber-gloved hand. There were a couple others beyond the door and looking in, setting up a stretcher. "Bosley called you, didn't he?" Brian asked, catching his breath. No response. Instead, the young and tall paramedic used his foot to put down the door stopper and stepped in so the other paramedics could walk through. "Thank God you're here," the teacher holding Eva said. Again, there was no response. The paramedics were like a single well-oiled machine, performing their tasks almost automatically and unfettered. Brian, sitting shirtless and blood-soaked by the main desk, watched in silence as the girl was put on the stretcher, barely alive. They strapped her in and were ready to go as quickly as they'd arrived. This was not normal. They wheeled her out in the main hall, slightly rustled wheels squeaking as they turned. Brian made a brisk walk toward the paramedics. They were headed for the main entrance. "Who are you? What's this all about?" He was right behind them now. "Answer me, Suddenly, Brian felt a severe shock at his nape, and he collapsed hard on the tiled floor. Kids these days. A chuckle. "Eva?" As the surge through his body was beginning to fade, Brian looked up to see a man in an ice suit standing above him with a flashy PR smile and graying hair. "Hope we don't see each other again," the sharp-dressed man sneered. Before Brian could respond, Jonathan Jordache kicked him in the ribs and walked off.